to John, "Glory to you, O Lord. I have revealed you to those whom you gave me out of the world. They were yours, you gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. Now they know that everything you have given me comes from you. For I gave them the words you gave me, and they accepted them. They knew with certainty that you sent me. They knew with certainty that I came from you, and they believed that you sent me. I pray for them. I am not praying for the world, but for those you have given me, for they are yours. All I have is yours, and all you have is mine, and glory has come to me through them. I will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe by that name you gave me. None has been lost except the one doomed to destruction, so that Scripture would be fulfilled. I am coming to you now, but I say these things while I am still in the world, so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please do take your seats. I mentioned at the start that we're thinking about what it means to be the church together, and we're looking at this prayer from John chapter 17, the prayer that Jesus prays the night before he dies. And so it's a prayer that I suppose the words carry enormous weight. If you've ever been with someone, if they're still lucid as they're approaching their death, you'll know that the words that you share at those final moments are words that stay with you, words that you remember, you hold on to. You might talk about all kinds of things, but there are at least moments where you feel like you're getting to know the person's deepest heart. This is a thing they want you to remember after they're gone. And so it is. In one sense, that's what we're getting with Jesus Christ in John 17. But even more so, because this is the words he's praying to his Father. He's sort of opening his heart to us as we listen in on this prayer. We saw last week that the first priority Jesus has, it's particularly verses 1 to 5, is about our worship. That before anything else, the most important, most precious thing we can have is God himself, and knowing him and loving him and being in relationship with him. But as we go on in the rest of the prayer, the second priority, if you like, the second thing that Jesus is concerned about is us. It's his people. Most of the rest of the prayer is about his followers, the church. Robert Murray McShane was a Scottish minister who once said this in a sermon to his parishioners: "If I could hear Christ praying for me in the next room, I would not fear a million enemies. Yet the distance makes no difference. He is praying for me." Imagine that thought. If you could just overhear, not so much the children in creche next door, but Jesus Christ praying for you. How would that make you feel? That the Son of God, the eternal Son, praying for you. This is what he's doing in John 17. But what's he praying about? What's his heart? What's his concern for us as the people of God together? He prays really, I think, for three things. Well, four, we'll come on to the fourth next week, but three for this week. First, he prays for us to be safe. Second, he prays for us to be set apart. And third, he prays for us to be united. So first of all, he prays for us to be safe. Really, that's the first thing he prays at all for us in verse 11. A bit of a preamble in verse 6 to 10. But the key prayer is this: Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me. His first followers, he's concerned for their ongoing protection. He says, I've been with them and I've looked after them and kept them safe, but I'm going. Now, Father, please protect them. And not just his first followers, but as he goes on, you heard it in verse 20, my prayers not for them alone, but for everyone who will believe. Now, it's just worth considering why he makes such a big deal of this protection, of keeping safe. If you're a parent, you know that there are times when you have to really labour the point with your kids to stay safe, when they're crossing the road, when they're by a swimming pool. Increasingly, it wasn't so much the case when I was a kid, but when they're going online, the child might not understand. What's the big deal about this road in front of me? Why do I have to walk around the swimming pool? I love going on the internet. What's the deal there? And the parent might feel like they're overdoing the point because they know what the kid doesn't know, that those three places are far less safe than they think they are. There's something of that, I think, in this prayer that Jesus prays. We might feel a bit over the top, that the first concern Jesus has for you is that you're safe. You might feel a bit like he's trying to mollycoddle you. I'm perfectly fine, thanks, Jesus, but I appreciate your concern. But I suppose that this is the first prayer that Jesus prays for his church. Protect them, Father. Is maybe a bit of a sort of eye-opener, a bit of a wake-up call that there are things that we need protecting from. Jesus isn't, if you like, a sort of life coach, here to dispense some tips about doing life better. Time and again, you find him talking about himself as things that are essential. He is your bread. He is your water. He is your shield. Are you going into battle? He is someone you need close to you, around you, with you, inside of you. So there might be something in all of us that when we hear Jesus praying for our protection, we think, well, really? I think I'll be fine. But Jesus, if you like, brings the full weight of God's power and authority. Protect them, he says, by your name, Father. We were just thinking with the children about God's name, the essence of who he is, the most fundamental thing. Jesus, if you like, calls the biggest reinforcements he could dream of in saying, protect my people. But why? Why does he need to pray for our protection, first of all? Well, that's because really, I think, of the second thing he prays for, that we'd be set apart. Because one of the things that maybe sits uncomfortably with us as we read this passage in a sort of liberal 21st century Western culture is that Jesus makes a big distinction in the passage. Verse 9, I pray for them. I am not praying for the world, but for those you have given me, for they are yours. And he goes on in verse 13 to 17, I am coming to you now, but I say these things while I'm still in the world. Verse 14, I've given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. It's not that Jesus doesn't care for everyone else. John 3:16, one of the most famous verses in the Bible, God so loved the world that he gave his only son. So God has his love that encompasses the whole of his creation. But here, Jesus deliberately says, this people are my people, your people, God, in a particular sense, and they are distinct from the world around them. It's not that he doesn't care for everyone else, but in fact, and we're going to see this particularly next week, it's as his people, God's people, are different, and unashamedly so, that they will be the blessing to the world around them that God intends for them to be. God intends to bless his whole creation. He's interested in every last bit, far, far more than any of us is. But particularly here in John 17, but picking up, I think, on something through the whole Bible, the way that God says he's going to bless this part of the world, particularly, is through his people here. And particularly not by his people looking the same as everyone else around them, but by being different. Even antagonistically so, distinctively, noticeably different. That doesn't sit well with any of us. None of us wants to stick out like a sore thumb wherever we go. You don't want to be the person who arrives at the wedding or the posh event not wearing the right clothes, and you're the only one who didn't get the memo. So there's something uncomfortable in this call to be set apart, to be different. But it is something that, well, particularly the early church, as I've thought about it and looked into it, the early church leaned hard into this, and the results were extraordinary. You may know the early church grew at an almost unbelievable rate. As historians have looked at the way that the Christianity grew from sort of this day and this night onwards, they found it very hard to make sense. How did the early Christian movement come to, if you like, take over the whole Roman Empire? At various points, people have tried to say things like, well, it must have had state backing. But all the growth really comes long before Christianity is a recognized religion. Here's the extraordinary thing, that if you take the kind of historical sources seriously, you have to say the early church grew by being different, noticeably, distinctively different from the world around them. So one historian came up with a list of all kinds of ways in which the early church was odd by their society. Now, if I read some of these out, some of them will sound very normal to us. That's how big a win, if you like, Christianity has had in our world. We take these things to be normal. But each of these things would have been very strange to the surrounding Roman culture. Meeting frequently, standing in prayer with their arms raised, praising and thanking God, making the sign of the cross, eating together at the Lord's Supper and other meals, giving the kiss of peace, memorizing texts from the Bible, visiting the poor, the sick, and prisoners, exercising hospitality, putting money in the collection box, replenishing the stocks of food and clothing as they cared for each other, feeding needy people, discerning carefully what in the culture to say yes to and what to say no to, being truthful, maintaining sexual purity, observing disciplines that limited impatient behavior, being willing to lose out in business, law, and arguments, allowing people to leave the church, not compelling belief, facing death without fear. All of those things are just drawn from what the early Christians were writing to each other to encourage each other to do. Now, some of them, we'd all say, amen, yes, we need more of that, feeding needy people. Some of them we might think, what on earth is going on there? Discerning carefully what in the culture to say yes and no to. Making the sign of the cross, praying with your arms raised. But these are the things the Christians said, look, this is what we think God is calling us to, and we don't care that the rest of the world looks at us and says, what on earth are you doing? I am convinced that that is the sort of thing that just basically puts into practice John chapter 17. You're different. If you belong to Jesus Christ, you are different. And you should live that out and leave God to do what he's going to do. And what he did in the case of the early church, they grew at the most extraordinary rate that no one could make sense of. So what does Jesus want for his church? He wants them to be safe because he wants them to be set apart and distinctive. And thirdly and finally, he wants them to be united. So towards the end of our reading, when Jesus prays, my prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. Now, he blurs at this point into what we're going to look at next week, which is, if you like, our mission as a church, going out into the world. But first of all here, Jesus is concerned about just us as a people together being united. And not just kind of being mates with each other. Again, he raises the stakes to the highest level. He says, as me and my Father are one, the Son of the Father from eternity. The way that a parent loves a child is obviously the closest bond we can think of, pretty much. And Jesus says, well, that's a bit like me and my Father's relationship. Except we've been in relationship from before the world began. And we know each other and are intimately bound to each other in ways that a parent and child relationship is just a tiny reflection of. And he says that relationship between Son and Father, the Son and the Father, he wants it to characterize all our relationships with each other. Now, how on earth can you live that out? Is it just pie in the sky? Well, the last thing just to notice is that Jesus says towards the start of the reading about his first disciples, they were yours, you gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. Now that's an extraordinary thing for Jesus to say about his disciples, because if you know his disciples, they are hopeless at obeying Jesus' words. They're complete failures. Just after this, they're all going to go to the garden, and he will tell them explicitly, stay awake and pray. And they're all going to fall asleep. So either Jesus is, if you like, looking at them through rose-tinted spectacles here. They've obeyed your word. They're brilliant. Or he sees something else. These disciples who are constant failures, who constantly let Jesus down, and very, very badly, if you like, they are learning from their master that with God there is forgiveness for failings over and over again. And they are invited, if you like, to inhabit a church, a culture, where we care for each other and forgive each other over and over again. Where we recognize that we will let each other down and we won't hold it against each other. Where we will strive to keep on believing the best about each other. Not thinking that if you're a new person here, you come to ruin everything. And if you're an old-timer, well, you just want to stay stuck in your ways. That is the sort of church, I think, that Jesus prays for when he prays that we may be one. You can go so far by exhorting yourself to be kinder to each other. But what Jesus does here, he says, all my power, I'm going to make it available to you to be that united sort of people. Very practically, by laying down my life and calling you to forgive each other on that basis. And to go on believing the best, just as Jesus goes on, if you like, believing the best about his friends. Now, I hope you can see that if this is the church he's calling us to be, we need all of his power, the power of God's name, to protect us and make us that sort of group, that sort of people. Let alone to be the sort of people that we'll go on to next week, the world will look at and know that there is a God who loves us. So I wonder, is that the sort of church you thought Jesus would be praying for? And is that the sort of church you would like to be part of? As we come to the Lord's table, we remember and relive and take in again to the core of our beings as we eat bread and drink wine, the extraordinary depth of God's love for us in making us this sort of church. Let's spend a moment in silence, responding to God in prayer, perhaps if we want to, praying about what it means in our own lives to be set apart for God. Ollie's then going to come and lead us in our prayers of intercession.